Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive, and we're doing this on Wednesday because Tuesday was the final day of training camp, and all hell broke loose. There were interviews on DVE in the morning. There was the Pivot podcast with Jalen Ramsey. There was all the exit type of interviews from the media on training camp. We couldn't find a time to step away and cut the podcast, so apologies to those of you expecting the episode yesterday. We are here today. We will be back to our normal show next week. I'm Ross. Above me here on the screen is my co-host, Joe Clark. Joe, camp is over. How are you feeling?
Feeling good. I'm excited to see how this team looks the rest of the preseason. Hopefully, we get to hear a lot more about the joint practice on Thursday, I guess tomorrow, to kind of hear more about how Aaron Rodgers looks against a non-Steelers defense. But camp, so far so good. Everything has kind of gone more or less, I think, kind of how we've expected it to so far.
Yeah, and we're not entirely sure how much is going to come out of that joint practice because they kind of locked those things down. It's not open to the public because it's back. It's back in what is that at Acrisure?
Yep.
So that'll be at Acrisure, and so it'll just be media, no public allowed in there, and so they can run more of kind of whatever they want to run that they're worried about getting out, to the prying eyes of the public on cameras and all that, but. Double-edged sword there. We don't actually get to see what's going on in there, and the media, I think, are very limited in terms of what they can report. It's probably going to be more like OTAs where they're maybe posting some clips during warm-ups and individual drills, and then there's kind of a more or less, not allowed to do anything else beyond that. So yeah, I think Aaron Rodgers kind of painted himself into a corner talking up the importance of those. And so I think people are going to be interested to see how he does. I think the expectation is, hopefully that he looks good. I don't know how much we're even going to hear about that. But we'll probably end up talking about that a little bit more next week once it's happened. Our topics today, we're going to talk about the preseason game 1 against the Jacksonville Jaguars on Saturday. We're going to be talking about Cam Heyward's holdout and some of the things he said about that. I guess he spoke to some of the Pittsburgh media the other day, one of the final days of camp there, and then renewed interest in wide receiver 2. We'll talk about why the Steelers might have that interest and maybe throw out some names of players they could be interested in. Starting with the preseason game, Joe, where do you want to start? What was if you had to give your, I guess, biggest sticking point, biggest takeaway, just one thing to focus on right now from that preseason game, what would it be?
I think it's how the Steelers looked against the Jaguars' first team defense, and in particular, kind of Troy Fautanu and Broderick Jones. I think they held up really well against Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker. And heading into the game, that was kind of the big thing I was looking for because we've heard a lot about Broderick Jones throughout training camp. He started off slow, then he was hurt, then he came back and he's supposedly getting better. But, you got to see it in a game action, and the Jaguars did play their starters. They played, those two guys are two of, some of the better edge rushers in the league, especially Hines Allen in terms of production and getting to the quarterback, and Walker's incredibly athletic. So I was impressed with how both Fautano and Jones held up. And then, I think you got to talk about just how sharp the quarterbacks were. Both Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson played really well. Thompson, too, he was, I think, under a little bit more pressure in the second half. The backup offensive line was not great when they were out there, and Thompson was, getting hit. He was, I think, and they only took one sack, but they were coming after him, and he stayed pretty steady. And I thought he played, a really strong game. So kind of interesting there because it's hard to find a place for him on the Steelers' 53-man roster, but is a team going to be desperate enough to throw a conditional seventh for him if he keeps playing well in the preseason? I'm not sure if that's going to be the case, but he definitely looked like somebody that should be on an NFL roster on Saturday night.
Yeah, going back to the offensive line, and I'll circle back to Skylar Thompson there, but Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu, I put up a film room on the site the other day. It did take a while, for whatever reason, for the NFL to upload the Steelers preseason All-22 stuff, and so I tried to get that up as soon as I could. But yeah, overall impressive stuff from both of them. I think Fautanu in particular looked really, really good. The Pro Football Focus, I'm not exactly sure what they were doing when they gave Fautanu a I think it was like a 48 or something. He was one of the lowest grades of the game. I think they basically just dinged him for that penalty he had. And honestly, looking back at the penalty, it wasn't the most egregious thing. It was the illegal hands to the face call. And I don't know, like there was one on Broderick Jones where a defender had him by the face mask and it wasn't called. And so, maybe some bad luck there on Fautanu's part. And the Steelers did overcome that penalty, so it wasn't the end of the world. And I think pretty much PFF just dinged him for that because otherwise he had a very impressive game. His hands were active. His feet were good. He didn't really get beat. There was a couple reps where he had to drop his anchor. He looked good there. There was a couple reps where he, had to swat away punches and long arms. He was doing some snatch and trap type of stuff. Very successful there. So everything that you saw on the college tape and some of the good stuff you saw in the limited action last year showing back up, kind of justifying some of the headlines of the past several months talking about Fautanu possibly being the Steelers' best offensive lineman despite his inexperience at this point. Broderick Jones, obviously one of the biggest stories. A lot of people have been calling him the X factor of the season. I think he was a little more up and down, but overall I think he passed the first test, given that he's still adjusting to life on the left and given that he really struggled at the beginning of training camp. At the very beginning of training camp, some of those clips were ugly of people running right by him. There wasn't any of that on tape, and I don't think there were any reps where he necessarily lost like handily or outright. None of the negative plays were because of Broderick Jones, I'll put it that way. But there were some glimpses of some of the issues from last year where he was maybe not throwing his punch on time, his keeping his arms a little bit too out wide. So some of the stuff that was showing up on tape last year, still showing up now, but he was much more kind of intentional about making that first contact. And I think overall he was using his hands much better than he had been. So he passed the first test. Now it's just about stacking good performances. So encouraging stuff there from the offensive line. And yeah, you talked about the quarterbacks. Rudolph, 9 for 10, 84 yards, 1 touchdown, took a sack. And the sack was squarely on him. Well, I guess not squarely on him. He held it for over 6 seconds. So, you got to get rid of the ball. In his defense, though, Caleb Johnson should have peeled out for the check down pass and did not. And so kind of partially on Caleb Johnson, partially on Mason Rudolph. But probably at 6 seconds, the alarm bell should be going off in your head to toss that thing away. But Skylar Thompson, also sharp, 20 for 28, 233 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 sack. And yeah, what do they do with Skylar Thompson? Will Howard, still injured, might return for the preseason, might not. If he doesn't, could the Steelers carry 4 quarterbacks onto the initial 53 to then stash Howard on IR?
Certainly a real possibility, especially if Howard doesn't play in the preseason. So then he's not going to be back. And I think it's hard to see him playing in the preseason, given that their final preseason game is August 21st. It's a week from Thursday now. So Howard would have to get back on the field probably next Monday or Tuesday and then get in a day or two of practice for the team to be comfortable throwing him out there. And at that point, I think it could be a strategic move to put Howard on IR, keep Thompson around, see if a team suffers a quarterback injury, and if you can look to move him, and then you can bring Howard back after the first few games. I mean, he's not going to play anyway, barring an injury to Mason Rudolph, an injury to Aaron Rodgers. So I think those two both getting hurt early in the season is, knock on wood, very unlikely. So it could be a nice way to kind of keep Thompson around and see if you can get something for him. Because, as I said earlier, he definitely looked like he belonged on a roster. He looked like he could be a very good third-string quarterback. He was going up against mostly backups in the second half, but it was still a strong showing, and I thought he had some good touch on some balls. He was poised. He got the ball downfield. So definitely a guy that I think can boost his stock and kind of make that a reality if he plays well these next 2 preseason games.
Yeah, and this is a guy who had started a couple games for the Dolphins over the years, and I think 3 starts, and I think did he even start a playoff game for them when Tua was hurt?
He started the wildcard game in 2021, I want to say.
So he has some experience, and I think actually at least one of those games, I remember people thinking he was maybe, the Dolphins maybe had something in him. I don't think it really panned out that way, but at least one of those games I remember being impressive in one of those starts. So yeah, a guy who I mean, if Howard doesn't play at all in the preseason, are you going to. I mean, it's just difficult to see them just wanting to cut Skylar Thompson outright. I don't think they're going to cut Howard outright either. And so that leads me to believe maybe they do carry a fourth on the initial 53, place Howard on IR, see how he, pans out from there. Maybe they just shut him down for the season because there's really no need to activate him. You don't want to necessarily have to waste one of those return slots on an emergency third quarterback who might not see the field, probably won't see the field. So, but yeah, I don't think they're going to cut Howard either. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine after all the hype, all the headlines? I mean, the fans just absolutely head over heels for this guy, and then he gets cut. Yeah, I mean, maybe they could get him onto their practice squad, but I think fans would not be too happy about that situation. But other stuff from the game, aside from quarterbacks and offensive line, Darnell Washington, obviously one of the big stories of the game. He had that nice touchdown. It was just the one catch that he had, I think, but it was a big one. He ran kind of a wider seam route and then left himself space to come back. I mean, no one's stopping that. If you place that thing right, Darnell Washington looking massive, looking nimble, going up and grabbing that ball and falling into the end zone, dunking on the uprights. Joe, I wanted to look at. I can't remember. I don't know if you have your pass game projections from that sheet that we did, the exercise. I'll kind of vamp on mine since I have it pulled up, and we'll see if you can get yours pulled up in time. But I had Darnell Washington with 21 receptions, 210 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And going back to that exercise, it is difficult to find enough yards and touchdowns for the tight ends, because you go through and you're like, all right, well, I mean, if you want to, I don't want to go back through the whole thing, but if you want to see it, I think it was a few, 3, 4, 5 episodes ago that we did Joe's and my pass game projections. And man, I can't help but look at my projection for Darnell Washington and just say that's too low.
Yeah, I had mine 21 receptions, 210 yards, and 4 touchdowns.
Oh, we were pretty much the exact same.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know where, I could give him more because as we learned when I went on, mine were pretty high when it came to some of these totals. But I mean, you could take away from Ben Skowronek maybe. I mean, I had 17 receptions for Skowronek. That might be a little bit high when you get into the course of the season. So I mean, yeah, I think given what we've seen and what we've heard about Darnell Washington, I think it was Jeff Hathorn who said that Aaron Rodgers is the first quarterback who actually knows how to use him. And we saw him expand as a passer last year. I think the numbers I put down from are, pretty. I think he got 20 passes last year, so pretty similar to what he did last season. I mean, could he catch 30, 35 passes this year and be good for, 5, 6 touchdowns as a red zone threat? I think that's certainly in the realm of possibility. So, I mean, I feel like I'm probably a little bit low, but it's just so hard to figure out where all these receptions and everything's going to come from. But I do think, given what we've seen and heard from Washington, he's definitely a guy that we might both have a little bit too low.
Yeah, I agree. Just looking at Alex Kazora's training camp stats for all 14 practices, which he just posted on SteelersDepot.com this morning, Darnell Washington ended up with 14 receptions on 16 targets. So he caught basically everything thrown his way for 4 touchdowns. And let me see, I think that's near the top of the touchdown list. I think, yeah, that's second. So DK Metcalf with 10 at training camp, Darnell Washington second at training camp with 4. Of course, Jonnu Smith wasn't practicing all that much. Same with Calvin Austin. And, so it is training camp. So the stats you take with a grain of salt. But it was an interesting exercise always from Alex to put those together. And just the fact that he's catching everything thrown his way, that builds up trust from those quarterbacks. And yeah, I think I would adjust Darnell Washington's stats up at this point in time. I don't know how much. I mean, are we bumping him up? I would consider doubling the touchdowns I had from 3 to 6. Maybe a 50% bump in receptions from 21 to about 30. Like, I could see that. But, then who's that cutting into? Jonnu? Is it Pat? Or is it one of the receivers? I don't know. But I just kind of get the feeling that Darnell Washington's going to be a bigger deal in the receiving game than we were giving him credit for. And honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up with the second most receiving yards or even receptions of the tight ends. And I think that would be kind of a surprise to most people. But Jonnu Smith seems to be dealing with injury stuff. And I mean, I don't know. I'm just high on Darnell Washington in general. But moving on to some other stuff from the game, because we do have a lot of stuff to get through still. I wanted to all right, let's just fly through some of this stuff. Brandon Echols, Juan Thornhill stood out. Juan Thornhill came downhill and hit Brian Thomas Jr., sent him into another dimension there and kind of knocked the ball loose. That was a positive thing. Brandon Echols had a pass deflection on third down that probably could have been an interception. I think both of them had great games. Beanie Bishop Jr. led the team in tackles, I think, or maybe second after Carson Bruner, one or the other there. But Beanie Bishop Jr. was around the ball, showing off that short tackling. I think there was at least one rep where he could have gotten beat pretty badly, but it was kind of underthrown. And so, maybe his game could have looked a little worse if the Jaguars played a little better, but he still made the plays that were there for him, and you got to give him credit for that. Y.A. Black, this is a guy who had a huge game. I mean, we heard about him swatting down balls at practice. He only played 10 snaps in this game, and I'm not sure. Originally, I kind of thought he only played 10 snaps because the Steelers saw enough, but we come to find out that he was wearing an elbow wrap at practice, the final training camp practice, so maybe it was injury-related, though Tomlin did not mention him after the game, so I don't know if they knew he had an injury or not or what the deal is there, but I think either way, he had a very impressive game, grabbing guys' hands, elbows, arms, really good hand fighting, using that size, washing people down the line of scrimmage, making tackles in the run game, even getting a pressure in this game with a really nice push-pull move. And so, yeah, Y.A. Black's another big standout. Joe, real quick on Caleb Johnson, what'd you see?
I think a lot of some of the takes after this game have been overblown. I mean, I saw he had the one play where he made the nice move he broke the tackle and did a little stepped around Travis Hunter for, I think that was an 11-yard run or 7-yard run, something like that. Either way, it was his longest run of the night. I think it might have been 7.
Yeah, 7.
Yeah, so that was an impressive play out of him. I mean, he didn't the second half, like we said with Skylar Thompson, getting demolished back there at times. Guys were shooting in the backfield, and Caleb Johnson had nowhere to run. So I don't really think I saw too many issues with him as a runner. I think when he had space to operate, he did a pretty solid job. I mean, his work as a blocker, it needs some work. He did drop a pass, so we'll see how he can be as a receiver. And then, just getting on the same page with Aaron Rodgers and building that trust and being somebody that, the offense trusts to put out there. I mean, but I'm not really concerned with him as a runner. I think, what I saw from him was more or less what I expected to see. I mean, there wasn't anything big and flashy, but when there was a hole, he went through it. He ran hard. He ran tough. So, I mean, I thought it was a fine debut. It wasn't anything special, but I don't think he had a ton of chances to really, get out into the open field and show what he can do. So I'm not really ready to push the panic button on Caleb Johnson as some seem to be after one preseason game.
Oh, yeah, I'm not ready to panic at all, but it was, I guess, if you had to point to one disappointing thing, it was probably his debut in my mind. But, yeah, I thought there were a couple holes that he didn't, I mean, for the most part, I agree with you, but there were a couple holes. He seems to enjoy bouncing outside, so he seems to, there were a couple holes I think he could have maybe gone through. It's hard to really, on tape, it is kind of hard sometimes because it looks like there's a hole, but a linebacker's kind of lurking back there, or a defensive lineman's kind of flashing his body. And so it is, you don't want to just, obviously we have the benefit of looking from a bird's eye view, and it's much easier to see the vision there. So you don't want to knock him too much for that, but it does look like he has a propensity to bounce outside. Obviously the drop, you don't want to see the drop. That, it's something he's going to need to prove, and that's not a trend for him, and that remains to be seen. But yeah, I think overall, you saw some stiff arms, you saw some speed, so kind of a lukewarm debut for me. Hoping to see more this upcoming game, and I think Mike Tomlin said that's somebody he expects to have a kind of a big leap in game 2, so hopefully we see quite a bit more of him this upcoming week against the Buccaneers. All right, we're going to move on to our second topic, Cam Heyward's holdout, and of course Adam Schefter announced that Cam Heyward was going to have a holdout, Chris Boswell as well. We're going to focus on Heyward right now, but Heyward finally talked to the media after, 5, 6 days of silence after that initial report and said quite a few things, maybe honestly too many things, in my opinion, he said he's willing to sit out some, well, okay, I shouldn't say that. He didn't rule out the possibility when asked that, maybe he could sit out some regular season games. So it sounded like he might be willing to do that, or at least that's his negotiating tactic to say that. He said he was asked to take a pay cut last year, and I think he pretty much agreed to last year's contract, which was more or less a year-by-year deal where the Steelers could get out of it. It was a very team-friendly deal. Although people were upset with that contract at the time, it was actually very team-friendly. And now here we find kind of what happens when he ends up having an all-pro season, because he told the Steelers, hey, if I have an all-pro season, I'm going to come back and we're going to renegotiate. And I guess he said that there were some laughs in the room when he said that. And lo and behold, here we are, and sounds like he's willing to do a holdout.
Yeah. I mean, my initial reaction when this news came out was I was kind of like, really, we're going to do this whole contract thing with him again? But you look at who, like, the money he's making, and it's like egregious how good Cam Heyward is. He's sandwiched between Javon Kinlaw and Dalvin Tomlinson in contracts. I mean, Zach Allen from the Broncos, who's not even close to the same level of player Heyward, has just got a massive new extension. I mean, over $100 million total. And Hayward's not going to do that, but I mean, to say that this guy's not worth, at least 23, $24 million per season is a little bit insane. So I completely understand where he's coming from here. And I think the Steelers really need to be open to getting something done before the season. Of course, Adam Schefter reported that they're not really open to it right now. They don't seem like they want to pay him. So we'll see what happens, because that thing could get a little messy if he does live up to his threat of wanting to sit out, or not wanting to sit out, but his threat of willing to sit out to start the regular season. And the Steelers don't negotiate contracts in season. So what's that going to entail? It's gonna. I mean, I think they have to hammer something out here. So it's gonna be really interesting to see what happens now over the next few weeks. If the team doesn't want to pay him, and he can't justify playing on his current salary.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the thing last year where it's like Cam Heyward wanted that extension because he wants to make sure he can play enough years to solidify his kind of legacy in the NFL as a Hall of Famer. And I think he's probably just about done that already. But this isn't a guy who I think really wants to sit out a game. And it really, if he sits out a game, I mean, this is going to be a Le'Veon Bell situation where he's sitting out a season. Because like you said, the Steelers do not negotiate in season. So what does that look like? You're not going to... I mean, he's not. If he's sitting out games, I don't think he would cave. Maybe he would. I mean, maybe that's what happens. Maybe he sits out some games, realizes that they are not going to break precedent, and then comes back. I mean, that would be kind of some egg on his face there. But and I think he's already kind of not building up great will among the fan base, which in my opinion, kind of not really deserved. I think fans just don't like seeing rich people ask for more money, which is understandable, but. I mean, this guy deserves the money. It would be different if this was like the 9th best defensive tackle at 6 years old. But this was the best defensive tackle last year, and he's getting paid 23rd in average salary right now for defensive tackles. I mean, that's just egregious bad. He absolutely deserves to ask for more money. Our Dave Bryan threw out the solution that they can just shift money from next year into this year, kind of shuffle money around. It wouldn't technically be redoing his contract. It'd be more of a restructure. So it would kind of maintain the precedent that the Steelers like to have with not negotiating unless you are 1 year remaining on that contract. And so, yeah, I think that's the most likely outcome. I think that's what we're going to see. But it doesn't sound like the Steelers are super willing to just cave. So we'll see what happens. Cam Heyward, super involved with the NFLPA. Could that be influencing his decision? I think that's an interesting angle potentially, just because, NFLPA is in some interesting times right now. They're probably starting to think about what their next negotiating points in the next CBA are. Obviously, the NFLPA has new leadership because of the whole firing thing that just happened, or the guy who stepped down should have been fired. I think that's kind of an interesting thing to think about for Cam in this situation. But the other thing is, Cam's already been paid most of the money that he's due for the year. And so if he does choose to sit out games, it's not really going to hurt his pocketbook. Those game checks he would lose are, negligible money for somebody who's made over $100 million in their career. So I think I think he uses that as the bargaining chip, but I don't see him sitting out any games. I don't see him wanting to miss this season. And I mean, we saw last year he wanted to sit out OTAs or whatever. He couldn't even sit out more than like 3 OTAs before he's like, okay, I'm a leader of this team. I feel a responsibility. I mean, same thing here. I think it's going to get resolved. It just might take until when's the Steelers' first game? The 8th of September, something like that. 7th, 8th,
7th.
7th. So this might happen on the 6th of September there. Maybe even one of those Polamalu situations where it's like on the team plane or whatever. Anyway, we're going to move on to the last topic here. Renewed interest in a wide receiver. Mark Cabali this morning on the Cabali and Mac podcast on YouTube. He kind of made one of those super annoying vague tweets last night where he said something along the lines of look out for yeet, which I need a translator to even know what that means. But he did clarify some of that on the podcast this morning. Here's the quote. I'll put it this way. I would not be shocked within the next 10 to 12 days that they add a receiver. I was under the impression that they're just going to play it out like they were right now. We have Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin. We're going with that. I was pretty much sure of that. I don't know if I'm sure of that anymore. Quote, the yeet is that I was not under the impression they were interested in a receiver, but now that might have changed. So strongly suggesting that the Steelers are going to be after a receiver. Joe, why is this happening now?
Well, two things. First of all, congratulations on being the most loyal listener to Cabali and Mac, and I hope you have a Paul Skeen signed baseball coming your way. Two, the sentence, the yeet is that I was not under the impression that they were interested, blah, 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 is not something I ever thought we would have to read live. However, I think this is kind of happening now because Calvin Austin III hasn't practiced, so even if you still expect him to play at, a pretty high wide receiver 2 level, we haven't really seen him yet, so you're giving yourself some insurance. And even before training camp, the team at least dabbled in, some wide receiver interest by hosting Gabe Davis for a visit. You have Roman Wilson, who he played, he got a lot of praise for how he played on that preseason game, but he's still a little bit of an unknown quantity. Robert Woods might not even make the roster. Like he's up in the air. Ben Skoronek's more of a special teamer. So if you really want another reliable receiver to kind of give this offense more of at least a safer floor, I would say, with Aaron Rodgers, then you can look and try to acquire another outside receiver. Who that's going to be? I mean, trade candidates off the top of my head, Alec Pierce is the one that I think we've bantied about. Alex has mentioned him a bunch. But other than that, I mean, nobody's jumping into my head right now as somebody to trade for. And even then, they probably don't want to trade 2026 draft capital. So, I mean, is it like an Amari Cooper type? Traylon Burks broke his collarbone. He's not going to be ready till late in the season. Plus, he's also very unproven. He's not going to raise your floor. So, that one would make a lot of sense. Odell Beckham Jr. makes limited sense to me. And I don't think they're trading for Terry McLaurin. So, I mean,
Right.
yeah, could it be an Amari Cooper? Could it be Gabe Davis? Now that, he's getting healthier. He still wasn't fully healthy as of a few weeks ago. He was on Up and Adams, and he said he still is, after his meniscus, he wasn't fully healthy, but he came in for a visit that seemingly went well. And I know Jeremy Fowler, after the Steelers made the Jalen Ramsey trade, said Gabe Davis could be an option for them closer to training camp. He remains unsigned. So I think like Cooper and Gabe Davis are kind of the two guys you're looking at right now as to who the Steelers could potentially be interested in adding.
Yeah, I think the big part of the story of this potential, I mean, it sounds like Cabali's hearing from somebody that the Steelers are poking around the receiver market. And so the big story to me is the Calvin Austin the third thing. And Zach Azani called him the team's wide receiver too. I think he had a decent start to training camp, but it didn't last long because he hasn't practiced since Friday Night Lights. Mike Tomlin has pretty much described everyone else's injury at some point in time. Calvin Austin III, I don't even really remember him mentioning Calvin Austin III when it happened. He just kind of stopped practicing, and then eventually Tomlin said, oh, he's day-to-day, and, we should have him back in quick order, and, day-to-day has turned into, like, more and more vague language as we go, where I think recently he said, like, we'll see, and it's starting to sound kind of rough. I mean, you think back to Russell Wilson last year and kind of, when he had that calf initially, I don't know if he labeled it day to day, but he called it minor, and you heard things like, oh, if it was a game, I'd be playing now. And so you heard stuff like that. And of course, that thing lasted months. And so I think Kaboly he was asked more or less, does this have to do with interest that they have in someone that you're hearing about, or does this have more to do with Calvin Austin? And Kaboly said both. I think the Austin thing is the big story here. And if the Steelers aren't going to have their wide receiver 2, then who's that going to be? Roman Wilson, probably the biggest candidate. Thankfully, he kind of had a little bit of a showing there over the last week of training camp, and in the first preseason game, he had the 19-yard reception to kick things off. He had another, I think, 5-yard or 4-yard reception as well. One of those, the first one, was in traffic, and so I think it was an impressive game for him, and I hope to see that only ramp up. And so, but at the same time, I don't think the Steelers are comfortable having him as their only wide receiver 2. And so that kind of leads you to, who are they going to get? Amari Cooper, or, you threw out some of those names. I think Cooper could make some sense. I think especially in kind of a backup role. He kind of fell off a cliff a little bit last year with he was with the Browns and then the Bills, and didn't do a ton. But just 2 years ago, he had a pretty good season there in Cleveland, I think. So that one could make some sense to me, but remains to be seen. I think Kaboly threw out a 10 to 12 day timetable, a lot of hedging in his very cryptic language throughout the whole segment that he did. But it does sound, at the very least, like the Steelers have interest, and maybe they are potentially concerned about Calvin Austin. So that is the takeaway there. Anything else to add there, Joe?
No, I think that hit everything.
All right, well, we're going to move into our question, and this one is from Brett in San Angelo, Texas. If you have a question, call in 412-254-3145. That's also in the show notes. If I spoke too fast, you can text that number or call and leave a voicemail. Just tell us your name, where you're from, and a brief question that we will answer on a future episode. This one from Brett.
Hello, Depot Dive. This is Brett from San Angelo. And I had a technical question that I'm wondering if you guys can answer. So there's been discussion, obviously with the struggles of the running game in the preseason game we just watched. I'm struck by a question because they talked about in the past on the podcast the offensive line coach being the de facto run game coordinator and the offensive coordinator essentially being the passing game coordinator. And what I'm wondering is, how does that work in the case with Arthur Smith, who has kind of his own specific system, which seems to be on surface different than Pat Meyer? And I guess the question being is the struggles in the running game a function of the Arthur Smith system, or is this function of Pat Meyer, who is got the thumbprint on the performance from a coaching and coordination perspective? If you have an answer, great. Otherwise, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll hang up and listen to the answer.
All right, thank you, Brett, as always, for the question. This one, I don't know if I have like 100%. I know exactly how this works, but I have some kind of context clues to go off of. The Steelers, as of last year, had the smallest coaching staff in the league. And so to a certain extent, there's people are wearing multiple hats and they kind of have to. And so during certain sessions where maybe they're doing 7-on-7 and, maybe Arthur Smith's kind of focusing more on the quarterback and wide receiver and tight end kind of play, well, you're going to need somebody like a Pat Meyer to focus more on the run game stuff. And so, I think, obviously offensive line's going to focus more on run game coordination. And I think that, Pat Meyer has worn that hat for the Steelers in the past. I do wonder if Matt Canada, if maybe he was wearing more of that hat with Matt Canada than he is with Arthur Smith, just given Arthur Smith's kind of proven track record of success. And Arthur Smith himself has been an offensive line coach, a tight end coach, a head coach, an offensive coordinator. So, I do wonder if Arthur Smith, I think, the obvious answer is Arthur Smith has a scheme and he kind of sets the scheme, and then Pat Meyer might kind of make small tweaks and coach to that scheme, and kind of he's responsible for carrying out the execution of that. And so that's my 2 cents. I don't know, Joe, if you have anything to add there.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Just that, yeah, Meyer's probably the de facto run game coordinator, but he's coaching to the Arthur Smith scheme. He's not really incorporating any of his own, views on scheme into how he's teaching the run game. So everything's, really does go through Arthur Smith at the end of the day.
Yeah, pretty much how, people talk about, oh, it's a Mike Tomlin, defense or whatever. And I think Tomlin kind of sets the philosophy, and Terrell Austin is, maybe doesn't have as much power as some other defensive coordinators in the league, but he's kind of responsible for carrying out Mike Tomlin's kind of overall philosophy. Maybe a slightly different situation there because Austin would have more responsibilities as an actual coordinator than the offensive line coach, but similar kind of a dynamic there, I guess I will say. Arthur Smith did talk about he wasn't able to run, his preferred run game scheme last year because of the personnel and how maybe Caleb Johnson would be able to turn that around. And so I think that kind of gives us some context clues as well in that, yes, this is, Arthur Smith's scheme and Pat Meyer would just coach to it. So hope that answers your question there, Brett. I wish I had a firm answer. Maybe that might be a good one to write on over to the Terrible Podcast there. I think it's theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. And tune into the Terrible Podcast on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays with Alex Kazor and Dave Bryan. I'm sure they would be able to nerd out and maybe give a little bit closer of a answer on that question. But thank you for the question there, Brett. That's all that we have for the show. Again, 412-254-3145 if you want to have your question answered in a future episode. I'm Ross, that is Joe, and we will catch you guys next Tuesday.